Imagine a place, once vibrant and thriving, suddenly brought to its knees, not by a natural disaster or an economic collapse, but by something far more insidious. A deep internal wound that tore its very fabric apart. A community consumed by suspicion, resentment, and a pain so profound it seemed impossible to overcome. For the people of Havenwood, that nightmare was their reality. They were a town fractured, a place where neighbors no longer looked each other in the eye, where laughter was replaced by whispered accusations, and the simple act of trusting another became an impossible feat. The very air felt heavy with unspoken grief and lingering anger. It seemed as though hope itself had abandoned them. In the aftermath of a devastating event, an event that left scars far deeper than any physical wound, Havenwood became a ghost of its former self. Businesses closed, families moved away, and those who remained lived trapped in the shadow of what had happened. Every conversation was loaded, every glance held judgment. They were a community that had lost its way, unable to forgive, unable to forget. The idea of healing seemed not just distant, but utterly unreachable. It was a town without a future, bound forever by its painful past. But what if, even in the deepest despair, a tiny spark of resilience can still flicker? What if, against all odds, a community can find a way to confront its demons, mend its broken pieces, and not just survive, but truly heal? This is the extraordinary story of Havenwood. It's a testament to the unyielding strength of the human spirit, the quiet power of forgiveness, and the incredible journey of how a town, shattered by its own internal conflicts, somehow found a way back to itself. It's a tale about courage, empathy, and the profound truth that even when everything seems lost, a second chance is always possible. Stay with us, because this is a heartfelt chronicle about the remarkable power of collective healing. Havenwood was, by all accounts, an idyllic American town. Nestled in the rolling hills of New England, it boasted a picturesque town square, a bustling main street lined with family-owned shops, and a reputation for its close-knit community spirit. Everyone knew everyone. Children played freely in the parks, and Sunday church gatherings were the social highlight of the week. Life moved at a gentler pace, governed by shared traditions and mutual trust. Then came the fire. It wasn't a wildfire or an accidental blaze. It was arson. The town's beloved community center, a historic landmark that housed the local food bank, the youth club, and the senior citizens lounge, was deliberately set ablaze in the dead of night. The flames devoured decades of memories, turning a symbol of unity into a heap of charred rubble. But the real devastation wasn't just the loss of the building. It was the whisper that followed, the rumor that spread like wildfire through the town. The prime suspect was a local teenager, Mark Jensen, from the wrong side of the tracks. As some older residents would say, Mark, a quiet boy from a struggling family, had a history of minor infractions, shoplifting, a few skirmishes, but nothing that suggested such malice. Yet the evidence, circumstantial as it was, pointed to him. The trial that followed ripped Havenwood apart. The town divided sharply. Some, like Mrs. Gable, a stern, longtime resident whose family had lived in Havenwood for generations, were convinced of Mark's guilt. He was always trouble, she'd declare, her voice dripping with certainty. A bad seed. They clamored for justice, for punishment, for someone to blame for the sudden loss of their innocent past. Others, particularly the younger generation, and those who knew Mark more personally, believed in his innocence, or at least in the possibility of a misunderstanding. They saw a scared kid overwhelmed by circumstances. He's being scapegoated, they argued, pointing fingers at systemic biases. The verdict was split. Mark was found guilty of a lesser charge, but the lingering suspicion of his involvement in the arson remained, a dark cloud over his head and over the town. He was sent to a juvenile detention facility, but the wound in Havenwood refused to close. The community center was gone. The trust was gone. And in its place grew resentment, suspicion, and a chilling silence. Neighbors stopped talking. Friendships fractured over heated arguments. Businesses, unable to thrive in an atmosphere of division, began to close. The picturesque town square became quiet, almost desolate. The children still played, but their parents watched them with wary eyes, a subtle tension always present. Havenwood had lost its heart, and its soul seemed to be draining away too. Years passed, but the scars on Havenwood refused to fade. The charred remains of the community center were eventually cleared, replaced by a vacant lot that served as a constant, gaping reminder of their loss and their unresolved pain. Mark Jensen, now an adult, had served his time and disappeared from the public eye, presumably leaving Havenwood for good. Yet his name, whispered in hushed tones, still carried the weight of the town's collective trauma. The once vibrant town felt stagnant. New families rarely moved in, deterred by the palpable tension. Young people, especially, felt the suffocating weight of the past. They saw a town clinging to old grievances, unable to move forward. The local diner, once a hub of lively chatter, now had tables with patrons who sat in silence, carefully avoiding eye contact with those on the other side of the original debate. Even holiday parades, once a joyful spectacle, felt strained, with a forced cheer that couldn't quite mask the underlying discomfort. One of the most affected was Sarah Thompson, a young woman who had been a teenager when the fire happened. She remembered playing at the community center, attending youth group meetings there. The fire and its aftermath had shattered her sense of safety and belonging. She'd watched her own parents, once inseparable, argue bitterly over Mark's guilt, creating a chasm in her own home. Sarah had left Havenwood for college, vowing never to return, seeking the anonymity of a big city where past grievances didn't define you. But an unexpected family crisis, her mother's illness, forced her back reluctantly into the quiet, fractured town she had escaped. Returning was like stepping into a time warp. The same silent judgments, the same careful avoidance. Mrs. Gable still sat on her porch, her gaze sharp, suspicious of newcomers and old troublemakers alike. The town's single police officer, Chief Miller, who had led the original investigation, carried the burden of the unresolved tension on his shoulders, his face etched with worry. Sarah felt the familiar weight descend upon her, the sense of hopelessness that nothing would ever truly change here. She missed the vibrant spirit of her childhood Havenwood. She missed the sense of belonging. She missed feeling like part of something whole. She saw the toll it took on everyone. Her mother, weakened by illness, worried constantly about the state of their once united neighbors. The local shopkeepers struggled to make ends meet, their faces etched with quiet despair. The children, growing up in this fractured environment, lacked the unbridled joy and innocence that Sarah remembered from her own youth. They were learning to mistrust, to compartmentalize, to avoid difficult conversations. It wasn't a healthy way to live. Sarah knew, deep in her heart, that something had to give. The town was dying, slowly, painfully, consumed by its own wounds. But how do you heal a wound that has festered for years, infecting every relationship, every memory? How do you ask people to forgive when the pain still feels so real, so immediate? It seemed impossible. The catalyst for change came not from a grand gesture, but from a series of small, almost accidental moments, much like a tiny seed pushing through hardened earth. It began with Sarah. Having returned to Havenwood, she couldn't simply stand by and watch the town wither. She started small, organizing a community cleanup day for the town square, hoping to at least clear away the physical debris. Only a handful of people showed up, mostly older residents, but it was a start. They worked in silence, picking up litter, pulling weeds, the unspoken tension still thick in the air. But then, an unexpected moment broke the ice. As Mrs. Gable, stoic and reserved, struggled to lift a heavy bag of leaves, a young man, a stranger to Sarah, immediately stepped forward to help. He was quiet, efficient, and didn't expect a thank you. He just did it. Mrs. Gable, initially surprised, offered a rare, small nod of appreciation. That young man was David Shunn, a new resident who had moved to Havenwood for a quiet life, unaware of its fractured past. He was an unassuming presence, but his simple acts of helpfulness, fixing a broken fence for a neighbor, offering a ride to an elderly woman, began to subtly chip away at the town's ingrained suspicion. He saw people, not through the lens of past grievances, but as individuals who simply needed a hand. Simultaneously, an old, almost forgotten institution started to stir, the local historical society. Their longtime president, Mr. Henderson, a kind but usually timid man, made a surprising announcement. They had found old blueprints and historical records for the original community center. He proposed rebuilding it, not just as a building, but as a symbol of Havenwood's renewed spirit. The idea was met with skepticism, even outright derision, from many. Why bother? Some scoffed. It'll never be the same. But a few, a quiet minority who still longed for the old Havenwood, felt a flicker of hope. Sarah, inspired by David's quiet acts and Mr. Henderson's unexpected courage, decided to throw herself into the rebuilding project. She volunteered to lead the fundraising committee, a daunting task in a town where people were reluctant to invest in a shared future. She started knocking on doors, facing countless rejections, but occasionally she'd find a spark of enthusiasm, a lingering hope that had been buried under years of pain. The biggest obstacle wasn't just fundraising. It was the unresolved tension surrounding Mark Jensen. No one spoke his name, but his shadow still loomed over the vacant lot where the center once stood. Sarah realized that physical rebuilding alone wouldn't heal Havenwood. They needed something more profound. They needed to confront the very wound that had torn them apart. One evening, while researching historical records for the rebuilding project, Sarah stumbled upon old police files from the arson investigation. Deep within the dusty boxes, she found a handwritten note from a junior detective, questioning a critical piece of evidence against Mark Jensen, a discarded lighter found near the scene. The note suggested it had been handled improperly, possibly compromising its integrity as evidence. It was a tiny detail, but it sparked a chilling thought in Sarah's mind. What if Mark hadn't been the only one? What if there was more to the story? She felt a cold dread mixed with a burning urgency. If there was even a shred of doubt, the truth had to come out. For Havenwood to truly heal, it needed to know the full truth. This realization, terrifying and liberating, was the real turning point. Sarah, armed with the rediscovered note, knew she had to approach Chief Miller. It was a difficult conversation. Chief Miller was a man burdened by the past, his face lined with the weight of Havenwood's division. He listened to Sarah silently, his expression unreadable as she presented the old note. When she finished, he merely sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I remember that note," he finally said, his voice low. "Junior detective, fresh out of the academy. We looked into it. It didn't change the overall picture at the time. But Chief," Sarah pressed, "if there was any doubt about evidence integrity, even a small one, shouldn't the town know? Especially now, as we try to rebuild." Chief Miller looked out his office window, his gaze fixed on the empty lot where the community center once stood. He knew the truth was bigger than just Mark Jensen. He knew the town's division was slowly killing it. After a long, agonizing silence, he turned back to Sarah, his eyes filled with a new resolve. "You're right, Sarah. For Havenwood to heal, we need transparency. All of it? The chief reopened the investigation, quietly at first. He brought in fresh eyes, independent experts to re-examine the original evidence, particularly that lighter. What they found was shocking. The lighter, a key piece of evidence, had indeed been tampered with. It hadn't been Mark Jensen's at all. It belonged to someone else, someone from outside Havenwood, who had been passing through town and had a personal vendetta against the former director of the community center, a fact that had been overlooked in the initial haste to find a local culprit. The news hit Havenwood like a shockwave. A special town meeting was called. Chief Miller stood before the stunned residents, his voice steady as he laid out the new findings, admitting the flaws in the original investigation and exonerating Mark Jensen completely. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by an uncomfortable silence. Then the murmurs started. Disbelief, anger, regret. Mrs. Gable, usually so self-assured, sat with her mouth agape, her eyes wide with shock. The town's divisions, once so rigid, began to blur under the weight of this devastating truth. Shame and remorse settled over many who had so vehemently condemned Mark. Others, who had defended him, felt a bittersweet validation, tinged with sadness for the years of injustice. But then, something profound happened. A young woman who had, and Mark's friend in high school, stood up, her voice trembling. "We were so quick to judge," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We let anger blind us. We hurt him, and we hurt ourselves." Slowly, other voices rose, voices of regret, of apology, of a profound yearning for reconciliation. The meeting lasted for hours, turning from an indictment into a confessional, a collective reckoning with their past mistakes. For the first time in years, the town was united, not in division, but in a shared sorrow, a shared responsibility, and a shared desire for true healing. The next day, Havenwood awakened to a new dawn. The air still held the chill of winter, but something felt lighter, a burden lifted. The path to healing wasn't easy. It involved difficult conversations, uncomfortable apologies, and facing the deep-seated biases that had festered for so long. But the truth, no matter how painful, had set them free. They began by reaching out to Mark Jensen. It took time, but eventually, Sarah and Chief Miller managed to contact him. He was hesitant, understandably so, but after much persuasion, he agreed to return to Havenwood. His arrival was quiet, without fanfare. There were no grand apologies, just quiet conversations, tearful hugs from old friends, and a profound sense of mutual understanding. Mark, now a strong, resilient man, harbored no bitterness. He just wanted his name cleared and to see his hometown heal. His willingness to return, to face the very place that had wronged him, became the ultimate act of grace, dot with the truth. Laid bare and apologies offered, Havenwood truly began its journey towards a second chance. The rebuilding of the community center transformed from a mere construction project into a powerful symbol of their collective healing. This time, everyone participated. Former adversaries worked side by side, shoveling dirt, hammering nails, painting walls. Mrs. Gable, once the staunchest accuser, brought freshly baked cookies to the construction site every day, her eyes filled with a quiet humility. David Chun, the newcomer who had subtly sparked kindness, became an integral part of the volunteer effort, his steady presence a testament to the new Havenwood. The process was slow, filled with laughter and shared meals, but also moments of quiet reflection and even tears. Each nail hammered, each brick laid, was an act of forgiveness, an affirmation of unity. They weren't just building a physical structure. They were rebuilding trust, brick by painstaking brick. The new community center was designed to be even more inclusive, with open spaces for dialogue, quiet rooms for contemplation, and vibrant areas for celebration. It was a space built not just on wood and steel, but on a foundation of shared vulnerability and renewed purpose. The grand opening of the new Havenwood Community Center was a day etched forever in the town's memory. The entire town gathered, a sea of smiling faces, a stark contrast to the divided crowds of years past. Mark Jensen, invited as the guest of honor, stood beside Chief Miller and Sarah, his gaze sweeping over the joyful faces, his own eyes shining with emotion. He didn't speak of his pain, but of the remarkable capacity for growth and redemption he had witnessed in his hometown. The healing wasn't instantaneous, nor was it perfect. There were still difficult days, lingering shadows, and moments where old habits threatened to resurface. But now, they had a framework for dealing with them. They had learned the hard way that truth, even painful truth, was essential for reconciliation. They had learned that empathy was a stronger force than judgment. And most importantly, they had learned that true community wasn't about the absence of conflict, but about the willingness to mend what was broken, to forgive, and to offer second chances. Havenwood became a beacon, a living example of how a fractured community can find its way back to unity. Their story resonated far beyond their small town, inspiring others who faced similar divisions. They started community dialogues, mentorship, programs for at-risk youth, and traditions that celebrated their newfound togetherness. The children of Havenwood, once growing up in a shadow, now played freely in the new community center, their laughter echoing off walls built by hands that had once been clenched in anger, now open in cooperation. This is the profound truth of Havenwood, that healing is a journey, not a destination. It requires courage to confront the past, humility to admit mistakes, and an unwavering belief in the human capacity for change. Their second chance wasn't a gift. It was hard-won, earned through collective effort, empathy, and the brave decision to choose forgiveness over resentment. They showed us that no matter how deep the wound, no matter how fractured the spirit, a community can indeed heal. It simply needs to decide that healing is worth the fight, and that the bonds of humanity are stronger than any division. Their story stands as a powerful testament. It reminds us that even when hope feels utterly lost, a collective act of empathy, a commitment to truth, and the courage to offer a second chance can truly change everything. If Havenwood's incredible journey of healing resonated with you, if it gave you hope for reconciliation and second chances, please take a moment to like this video. Your likes help us share these powerful stories of collective resilience with more people who need to hear them. And if you're moved by true tales of human spirit, compassion, and transformation, be sure to subscribe to Heartfelt Chronicles. We bring you inspiring stories every week that remind us of the extraordinary power within us all. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss another journey with us. Do you know of a community that found a way to heal from past divisions? Or have you witnessed a powerful act of forgiveness? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. Let's create a space for positive connection. Thank you for watching. And remember, healing isn't always about forgetting. Sometimes it's about remembering with a reconciled heart and building a stronger future together. See you in the next Chronicle.